By the time Spock reached the stable footing of the trail, Lassiter and 7 other science specialists had materialized. Tallier, the ship's assistant historian, was huddled against the cliff, casting apprehensive looks toward the sheer drop just a meter from his feet. Spock wasted no time. "We have discovered a major Kalikt center. Unfortunately, someone has vandalized the site and taken great pains to conceal all signs of the Kalikt. We should proceed under the assumption that there is something even more dangerous about the Kalikt than we already know." Spock hefted his torch and turned back to the talus pile. "Let us proceed with our investigation." The inside of the cavern was far brighter than Spock had expected. Details of partially destroyed carving stood out in sharp relief. No light source was visible in the cavern, but whatever system the Kalikt had used to illuminate the area was still working. Silence, broken only by the whirs of a half-dozen tricorders, told him the rest of the party was also looking around. The chamber had once been as large as the Enterprise's hangar deck, with elaborately frescoed walls and ornately carved columns. However, the blast that had piled tons of rock over the entrance had disrupted the room's buttressing and toppled many of the decorative pillars. At the northern end of the room, where the blast had been strongest, all the supports had collapsed, and the roof and outer wall had been reduced to fragments little larger than Spock's fist. Ensign Temrin Keneles pointed her tricorder overhead and scanned the ceiling a third time. "I should detect something now that we're past the jamming field." Spock duplicated her tricorder scan. His readings showed nothing but solid rock over their heads. "All personnel should pay particular attention to locating power conduits and possible exits to adjacent sites." Tallier tilted his head to one side. "Does that mean you think there's more here than just this room, Mr. Spock?" "Indeed, Mr. Tallier. And the question is whether our technology and our powers of observation are equal to the task of penetrating the protective measures that someone used to conceal this place." Spock started examining the ceiling to determine how the illumination reached the carvings on the walls and spread through the enclosed cavern. On the Enterprise, McCoy had spent the entire afternoon comparing the test results of the dead Kalikt and was finally getting a handle on the Kalikt physiology. He looked up as Nurse Chapel returned from the lab. "Christine, if we don't figure out what makes these critters tick pretty soon, they're all going to starve. How will it look to Starfleet Command if we let Jim and the others die for lack of food? The problem, as I see it, is that they'll start shrinking inside those shells and their muscles will start pulling away from their attachment points." Chapel handed McCoy the summary tapes from the latest tests. "I think we may have enough to try constructing a usable formula." McCoy dropped Chapel's tape into his computer. The Kalikt had 3 triangular teeth set in the front of a tiny jaw. The arrangement of the teeth allowed the Kalikt to puncture its prey or to shear through soft tissue. The enzyme studies and the structure of their siphon-like proboscis suggested that they had injected their food with powerful enzymes. When the food liquefied, they sucked it into their gullets through the proboscis. McCoy concluded that the Kalikt were predators, functioning like certain terrestrial spiders. That meant that their natural foods resembled blood or pulverized meat. Chapel called up the same data on her console. "Doctor, why don't I figure out how to feed it to them while you work on the formula?" "Just what I was about to suggest." In the cavern on Karata 4, Tallier had been scanning a section of the wall decorations repeatedly in various spectral bands. When he pushed against the central medallion in the design, without warning, a section of the wall vanished, leaving a dark hole in its place. Spock stepped forward. "Please report, Mr. Tallier." These carvings, Mr. Spock, resemble similar work found on Belislav 5. There, the purpose of the carvings was to conceal the hidden passageways around the royal audience chambers. Spock studied the opening. Experimentally, he touched the surface. A tingling warmth crawled up his arm. He reached in further, waiting for the overwhelming pull which characterized the fields around the Kalikt transporters, but it didn't come. This field is different from the ones we have previously encountered. Will someone volunteer to walk through the field? Tellier's response was immediate. I will do it, sir. I activated the field, so I should be the person to risk its effects. Very well, Mr. Tellier. If you prove that passage through the field is safe, we all will explore beyond this room. Are you ready? The historian squared his shoulders. As ready as I'm going to be, Mr. Spock. Crossing to the opening, he took one last look around and then stepped through the force field. The field flared to gold and then faded to black. It was over a minute before Tellier, still in human form, stepped back through the field. There is an extensive system of corridors and rooms behind this entryway, Mr. Spock. I would guess this force field is here merely to keep the uninitiated from entering the heart of the complex. I hope you are correct, Mr. Tellier, because our answers are not in this chamber. Spock lined up his team, and one by one, they stepped through the Kalikt force field and into the unknown. The corridor was wide, and its walls were a mottled rusty beige. The low ceiling was barely high enough for the humans to stand erect. At intervals, broad portals pierced the walls, their doors deeply carved with violent and brutal scenes. Despite the immense age of the complex, everything was in pristine condition. Spock looked for clues that would direct them to the control center for the complex. Somewhere nearby, he hoped, they would discover a still-functioning library computer that contained the information they needed. After that, it became a race to change their people from Kalikt back to humans before more of them were killed. They stopped to look behind some of the doors. All opened into square rooms with very low ceilings. Most of the rooms contained objects made of sandstone slabs. Tellier suggested that they had been used for ritual penance or indoctrination. The further they moved away from the entrance, the more frequently other corridors crossed theirs. Finding the main control center depended on choosing the right path through this maze of rooms and corridors. Lassiter nibbled on a lock of her pale hair. It's got to be so obvious that we're missing it completely. Spock tried to see their surroundings from a Kalikt perspective. This corridor, like all the others, had been cut from solid rock, and no effort had been made to alter the natural colors or textures. In the distance they had traveled, the rocks had gone from the massive rusty sandstone near the entrance, to a finer-grained and lighter-colored sandstone, to the buff siltstone that surrounded them here. Perhaps they had some significance. Tellier was frowning at his tricorder. Mr. Spock, you said that their language was based on color and gesture, didn't you? My recommendation, for what it's worth, is to backtrack to the last fault and check everything in the immediate area. If there's any validity to an assumption that function correlates with color and rock type, we can examine the most alternatives in the smallest area. That does seem reasonable, Mr. Tellier. Within 5 minutes, they were marching back toward the last fault zone. When they reached it, the group fanned out to make a preliminary survey. Most of the rooms were identical to the ones they had been examining all along, except for 2 rooms that straddled the fault plane. They had been avoiding them, hoping that they would find their answer elsewhere. The door panels had scenes of torture, sacrificial slaughter, and ritual brutality with such precise and graphic detail that no one was anxious to explore how these rooms reflected that aspect of Kalikt society. Tellier glanced at the images. "I cannot think of a more effective way of discouraging people from opening this door." Spock pushed at the door and it swung open soundlessly. Most of the room was in deep shadow. The exception was a pool of brightness that surrounded a block of gray limestone. There were stains on the altar's sides and on the floor around it. Activating his tricorder, Spock advanced toward the object. Halfway down the room, the readouts began jumping too fast for him to follow. Behind him, he heard gasps of surprise as the others repeated his discovery. It was as though a barrier divided the room in half. Once they crossed it, their instruments detected all the information that had been screened from them before. One by one, the landing party circled the altar and stopped with their tricorders pointed at the gray block of limestone. Tellier said aloud what they already suspected. "If you didn't want unauthorized individuals to use your intra-building transport system, the best location for the control mechanism was the last place any sane person wanted to go." Spock took a deep breath. "Mr. Tellier and Ensign Nakamura, would you move the altar so we can see what the controls look like?" The two men crouched beside the block of gray stone and put their shoulders against its splotched surface. Finally, with a terrible screech, the rock began to move. The next instant, everything went black. Consciousness returned slowly. Spock allowed his surroundings to seep into his awareness before he opened his eyes, listening for the soft, uneven breathing of his people. The Enterprise's landing party appeared to be the only living things in the area. The transport system they had triggered by moving the altar stone operated differently from the Kalikt's main system. Instead of transforming the humans, this transporter had knocked them unconscious and delivered them to this location, wherever that was. Spock rolled to his feet. The landing party was in the center of a huge amphitheater-like room lit only by small, diffuse lights hidden among the rafters of the high, vaulted ceiling. At one end of the oval-shaped arena floor, a broad ramp led upward to an enclosed area. Unlike the rest of the complex, the doors to that room were plain and uncarved. The ruling class had reserved the vulgar carvings as intimidation for their followers. The system had sent them to the control center for the entire complex. Spock surmised that in the dim past, the Kalikt High Elders had ruled from here with an absolute life-and-death dominion over their people. They had passed information from generation to generation through a complex coming-of-age rite that imprinted crucial knowledge on the lower brains of the adolescent Kalikt. From there, it had been a short step for someone to invent machines to transcribe into the young absolutely faithful copies of everything the rulers wanted them to know. Looking closely at the lowest tier of the amphitheater, Spock recognized bank upon tilted bank of machinery. The controls laid out on the sloping surfaces were designed to be manipulated by Kalikt claws, and in many cases, several limbs were needed to reach all the appropriate contact points. Worse, there was no writing to identify anything. Instead, the consoles were color-coded, and the only readout devices were small screens that displayed the colors of the spectrum on a 2-minute cycle. If these machines contained the information that would let him change their people back to human form, only a Kalikt could decipher the data fast enough to help them. The others in the landing party began stirring, taking in their surroundings. Spock pulled out his communicator. Spock to Enterprise. "Mr. Scott, please locate the captain and beam him to this location. We are inside a large facility with enough open space to give you considerable leeway on the transporter coordinates." "Mr. Spock, I have grave doubts about transporting anyone through the electromagnetic disturbances that are localized around your coordinates. Can you suggest any alternatives? Negative. We are in the Collict Control Center, but we are not certain how we got here. The captain's assistance is urgently required to gain access to the Collict computers and other devices located in this room. Please take appropriate care in enhancing the transporter's signals, but get the captain here at once. Spock out. Spock started for the nearest bank of equipment. He had reached the narrow ramp leading to the first tier of machinery when he heard a shout behind him. Coming from nowhere, a small Collict charged the landing party. Its carapace flashed brilliant patterns that signaled complete madness. Spock fired his phaser, his shot catching the Collict an instant before the security guard's shots hit it. Under the combined force of 4 light stun beams, the Collict collapsed. Spock approached it. This Collict was smaller than Kirk, and he guessed the body probably housed Chekhov's consciousness. Spock holstered his phaser and gestured a guard to join him. While he is unconscious, we'll roll him on his back to prevent him from attacking us again. With Spock at the front and the guard lifting in the rear, they rolled Chekhov's host onto his back. If this alien was an example of what happened when humans were trapped too long in a Collict body, Spock knew they needed to rescue their people fast. An hour before sunset, Kirk's host finally caught up with a female. She was standing on the end of a headland, overlooking a small, muddy lake. She turned finally, flashing orange bars of irritation. "What do you want, boy? Be gone and leave an elder in peace." Kirk's host moved forward, his bold movements contradicting his groveling words. "O most high elder, I crave the honor of serving your needs in any manner that pleases you." She flashed her images more forcefully. "I have no need of soft-shelled babies like you." Kirk's host rubbed harder against the female's side, trying to impress her with his virility. "O most high and powerful elder, let me prove my worth to you." The Collict mind seemed unable to recognize that her refusal was sincere and permanent. Before Kirk could try to overcome the Collict's instincts, the female responded. Hooking her legs beneath his carapace, she shoved. He flipped over and landed on his back, sliding downhill. Suddenly, the ground dropped away from beneath him, and Kirk was sailing through the air 100 meters above the rusty surface of the lake. As Kirk was falling, tumbling pincers over carapace, toward the lake, he felt the welcome tingle of the transporter effect envelop his body. He materialized briefly in the Enterprise's transporter room as Scott lay in a new set of coordinates. "Welcome aboard, Captain. Mr. Spock is wanting to see you immediately on the planet's surface." Kirk felt a shock radiating from his lower brain, but the transporter engaged before the Collict mind could respond. When he rematerialized, Kirk felt his Collict brain close down all the voluntary functions of his body. His legs locked, and he flopped on his belly on the hard stone floor. Spock crouched in front of him. "Captain Kirk, can you hear me?" After what seemed like forever, Kirk regained his ability to communicate and managed the signal. "Yes, I hear you. Thanks for the rescue. Captain, this is the central control complex for the entire planet. We need your help to decipher how these machines work. Can you translate the colors and symbols for us so that I can implement a solution?" A few minutes later, while Kirk was still struggling to calm his host, the air before him shimmered, and something coalesced from the transporter effect. While Kirk was trying to figure out what was in the pouch that had appeared, his host leaped into action. The Collict stabbed its proboscis into it and began sucking greedily. Mentally, Kirk thanked McCoy for recreating a Collict meal from the meager clues available. As his host fed, Kirk felt a growing calmness settle over the Kilikt. Kirk realized that Spock had ordered McCoy to drug the food. With his host in this euphoric daze, Kirk could mine the Kilikt's brain for information and relay it to Spock. Spock studied him with an air of satisfaction. "Your body should be quite inebriated for several hours." Kirk swiveled his eye stalks around to examine the room with more care than his host had permitted until now. His first look at the tiers of equipment was disappointing. Bank upon bank of slope teaching machines reached from arena level to the back walls of the cavern. Every young Kilikt was brought to the holiest of holies after he survived his rite of passage. An elder tested each youngster and assigned it its adult position in Kilikt society, after which the youth was led to the appropriate tier of machines. When the programming was complete, the young Kilikt, all male, were turned loose on the planet's surface to fend for themselves until they had sired their predetermined quota of offspring. At that point, the surviving Kilikt males metamorphosed into young females. While the Kilikt biological cycle was the most bizarre he had ever encountered, knowing its details did not tell him how to change himself back to a human. The answers must be in the computers that control the teaching machines. He felt as though he was in the antechamber with no signs to tell him which doors led deeper into the complex. Looking around again, Kirk felt drawn to the featureless enclosure at the head of the arena. Kirk realized that no male Kilikt had ever been closer to that enclosure than the base of the ramp. He signaled to Spock. "It's in that place, Spock. I'm sure what we need is there." Spock lifted his eyebrow in surprise. "We considered exploring that structure, Captain, but our tricorders indicated that nothing was inside it." Kirk paused to collect his thoughts. Using the cumbersome dots and dashes of the Morse code to spell out every letter was draining him of energy at a far greater rate than he would have imagined. Finally, he signaled Spock. "These stations are dumb terminals. They transmit information from the central computers to the brains of the young Kilikt. They have no other purpose." "In that case, Captain, we will investigate the enclosure when you are ready." Staggering from his full stomach of drug-laced food, Kirk followed Spock up the ramp. Acting on instinct, he moved between the doors and placed 4 of his pincers on the precise spots that he saw in his mind. The wall went transparent, and a whirling vortex filled the space beyond. Kirk stepped forward into the maelstrom and landed in darkness. His head still spinning despite the solid stone beneath its pincers, Kirk realized that only the oldest and most powerful Kilikt females were allowed in this room. At his present age and as a male, it was a capital offense for him to be here. Kirk communicated with his Kilikt alter ego. "This is an exception. The elders chose us to solve the mystery of these aliens while they work elsewhere on the problem. They don't want the aliens to see them. We're the only ones who can do this job." To his surprise, the specious argument worked and gave him control of the Kilikt's actions. It took Kirk 15 minutes to find Spock, who had just managed to push himself to a sitting position. "Captain, I regret to report that I'm experiencing extreme sensory distortion. I am uncertain whether I shall be able to function in this place. A distortion field is affecting my vision and balance." As soon as Spock said the words distortion field, Kirk knew exactly where to look for the controls. He retraced his steps, climbing up the sloping control panel, slid his pincers into the control sockets, and squeezed the activation bars. Soon Kirk withdrew his pincers from the sockets and rejoined Spock. "Thank you, Captain. I presume we have reached our goal. But which computer contains the information we need?" The Kilikt lower brain did not respond, so Kirk signaled. Try more specific questions, Spock. I need a concrete trigger. Spock's eyebrow rose. Fascinating. Can you show me how the transit frames work? Kirk informed his lower brain, but the information provided was vague and confused. Kirk signaled back. I've got a rough notion where to start. They started off searching the maze for the console that matched Kirk's impressions. It took them almost an hour to find it, the only active unit in a battery of equipment as dead as the people it had once served. They set to work exploring the control systems for the transit frames. It was slow work, with Spock sometimes redirecting his questions 5 or 6 times before triggering any response from Kirk's host. When they stopped near midnight for Kirk to eat, Spock said what was in both their minds. This is not working, Captain. Your host does not possess the scientific programming we require to solve this problem. There is only one solution. I shall go through one of the transit frames and then have the Enterprise transport me back here. Logic dictates that I will be given a Kalikt persona with considerable technical expertise. Spock sidestepped Kirk's attempt to knock the communicator from his hand. Spock to Enterprise. 1 to beam up. Half an hour later, Spock materialized with a communications rig adapted for Kalikt pincers. It was strapped to his carapace. Kirk knew immediately that Spock had drugged his Kalikt body heavily before letting Scott transport him back into the control center. Spock moved to the sloping console that governed the transit frames and fitted his pincers into the sockets. Before long, Spock had gotten so deep into the programming for the system that Kirk could not understand any of the images. With nothing more he could do, Kirk settled down on his appendages and drifted off to sleep. A heavy thump close by aroused him from his nap. Spock was sprawled on the floor beside the console, his carapace pulsing an unhealthy grayish green. What's wrong? I don't know. I feel dizzy, faint, as if I can't breathe. Spock's words were distorted by random flickers of green, and Kirk thought he looked downright sick. Are you making any progress with our main problem? I believe so, Elder. However, I have reached a restricted level for which I do not have the access code. I believe we will need to locate a female Kalikt, what the system calls a High Elder, to proceed further. Spock settled his limbs around his body, as though preparing to stay put for some time. His color darkened to a brighter green, almost the hue of Vulcan blood. It is possible, Elder. There may not be enough iron in my system for me to breathe properly. The copper in my blood may be poisoning the Kalikt physiology. I sense that I must reverse the transformation soon, or I shall die. You won't die if I have anything to say about it. Kirk activated the communications unit and tapped in his message. There was one Kalikt female on the planet, and it was time she helped them. Talika materialized in a high fury, ready to tear apart anyone who approached her. Kirk was intensely grateful for the security team that Scott had sent down to control her. A calculated burst from their phasers immobilized her without rendering her unconscious. Then, Kirk flashed his words submissively. You must help us, O Highest One. We need access to the computer system so that we may change ourselves back to our human form. Talika's carapace darkened to a contemptuous fuchsia. Your blasphemy in invading this place merits death. No male has ever stood where you are and lived. And I would like to be elsewhere, most magnificent one. I need the access code to remove my unwelcome presence. Why should I bother? I can rip you open with my claws and let the cleaning robots carry off the mess. Kirk decided to try a different approach. You can kill me, your gloriousness, and the other male with me will die soon. That will erase the blasphemy you so detest, but it will also leave you with only 3 subjects to rule. And if you look behind you, you will see 4 aliens from a race unknown to any true Kalikt. I guarantee they will kill you if you harm me. Blasphemy! No self-respecting female should be forced to hear such vile insults. Sensing how close she was to the edge of her reason, Kirk delivered the final blow. You are as alien in this place as I am. Look into yourself, and you will know that you do not belong here. Her colors grew paler as Kirk's meaning reached her. Kirk delivered his clinching argument in gentle, supportive colors. If you want to see your sisters again, Elder Talika, you must give Spock the access code so that he may free you from your present form. Talika's host was able to drag herself to the console that controlled the transit frames. Pulling herself into position, she slid her pincers into the sockets and shifted the levers in an intricate pattern that Kirk would have thought was beyond her in her present half-stunned condition. When she finished, she withdrew her pincers and wandered away, her movements unsteady and wavering. Spock struggled to get to his feet after Talika left, but his strength was almost gone. 2 of the security guards lifted him into position on the sloping console. With slow, hesitant movements, he entered a long string of commands into the system. Finally, Spock withdrew his pincers from the sockets. I believe I have done it. The best test is that I try it. Very well, Spock. You test it, and I will persuade the others to go through. Kirk signaled the ship to transport him, Spock, and the security guards to the nearest transit frame. Spock tried to stagger through the frame, but he was too weak to stand, and his carapace was turning a ghastly, mottled green. Kirk ordered the security team to carry Spock to the frame and push him through. As Spock's front pincers disappeared into the window's surface, the scene wavered and broke up. When the scene reappeared, an emergency medical team led by Dr. McCoy was clustered around Spock's inert but fully restored body. Kirk wanted to turn his attention to getting the others back through the transit frames, but he felt a tide of insanity rising inside him. He forced his limbs into motion and threw himself through the transit frame. Kirk awoke with a splitting headache. McCoy appeared at his bedside. How do you feel, Jim? My head hurts. But other than that, I'm fine. Let me out of here. McCoy ran a scanner over him and confirmed the report on the overhead monitor. Not so fast, Jim. What do you remember about the last couple of days? The last couple of days? Don't be ridiculous. We've been... His voice trailed off as he tried to remember what he had been doing for the last 2 days. The Enterprise had been hauling a bunch of archaeologists around the sector, and they had discovered... Slowly, the details of their investigation on Karata 4 drifted into focus. An ancient and sinister race, inexplicable artifacts that still operated after 200,000 years, being transformed into one of the aliens. Bones. How Spock? A pleased grin lit McCoy's face, but he sobered immediately. He hasn't regained consciousness, Jim. I was afraid to do too much for him until I knew what exactly had happened. He wasn't in very good shape when he came back. What about the others? Chekhov and Dr. Talika, and the guards? Recovering. Once you and Spock came through, Mr. Scott and I thought we had better get everyone back. It took a little doing, but they're all on board and accounted for. Can't you let me up and give me something for this headache, Bones? Kirk pushed himself to a sitting position, rubbing his forehead. The hypo hissed as McCoy pressed it against his arm. You know, Jim, you came through fairly well except for your memory. We had to use the corticosynaptic modulator to bring it back quicker. That explains the headache. Kirk eased himself to his feet, testing his balance and checking for minor injuries from his adventure as a Calict. He found a few bruises and strains, but nothing that wouldn't heal within a few days. Five days later, everyone was recovered enough to evaluate their experiences on Karata 4. Spock straightened in his chair. Captain, I have been exploring options for severing the links between the Calict devices and their power sources. The Calict designed their systems to withstand all forms of tampering and, indeed, most forms of mass destruction. Chekhov nodded in agreement. I have been assisting Mr. Spock in his investigations. We have been unable to discover a way to operate these devices unless the operator is wearing a Calict body. Talika lifted a massive hand to request the floor. No one must ever again Calict be. When Calict I was, believed I, that of universe sole ruler was I. God almost. Humans less than animals were. When again as myself woke I, realized I that the Helaphons often others almost as badly treat. This to be wrong know I now. If persons must to study Calict evil become, then study Calict they should not. Lassiter nodded her agreement, one hand twisting into her pale blonde hair. The Calict gloried in every horrible action we've ever heard of. The true horror of Calict's genocidal massacres is that they never considered that the other races they encountered might be intelligent. And since the only way we can learn their language and study their knowledge is to become one of them, we cannot escape their evil, even though we tell ourselves we are searching only for the good. Dr. Call's face was rigid with anger. I protest. This is the discovery of a lifetime, and you people want to bury it forever. Science deserves the chance to explore what the Calict have to offer us. Kirk looked around the room, seeing how Dr. Call's words sparked an answering fury in the others. I agree in principle with Dr. Call that every discovery should be explored to learn how we might benefit from it. However, in this case, I don't see any way we can study the Calict civilization from the outside. My official recommendation is to quarantine Karata 4 and permanently ban all investigations of its surface. Dr. Call jumped to his feet, slapping both palms against the table. I protest most strongly at this refusal to examine the find of such significance. Kirk pinned Dr. Call with a steely glare. We were down there on the planet, and you weren't. The Calict and their technology are too dangerous for us to meddle with. Your objections will be noted in my official report, Dr. Call, but the quarantine recommendation stands. Briefing dismissed. Before Dr. Call could collect himself for further argument, Kirk made good his escape. The bridge seemed wonderfully clean and peaceful and orderly after his experiences on the planet. Settling himself into the familiar contours of his command chair, Kirk gave the order they had all been waiting to hear for the last 5 days. Mr. Sulu, take us out of here. Warp Factor 2.
Star Trek: Windows on a Lost World by V.E. Mitchell, was adapted for audio by George Truitt and performed by Walter Koenig. The recording engineer was Rick Dasher. Editing by Paul Goodrich. Post-production and sound design by Stephen Erickson. Original music was composed by Carl Sharif, Sam McCallie, Eve Baglarian, Richard Emmett, and Carl Schertz. Theme music from the Star Trek television series was composed by Alexander Courage and Gene Roddenberry, used courtesy of Bruin Music. The associate producer was Christine Nelson. Star Trek: Windows on a Lost World was directed and produced by Karen Frillman.